Oh, my hair gets so floppy after the shower.
Oh, I haven't showered today.
I just showered.
Look good for the podcast?
Oh, I don't like going to bed sweaty.
Oh, you just do it a few times, you get used to it. Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, where the most effort goes into the opening. How's it going, Scott?
It's going well, and that took about 4 minutes to come up with that.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And actually, I will say that Scott was the one who came up with that.
My first, which really means it required zero effort.
Want to talk drinks?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Well, mine's boring.
Mine's interesting, so you go first.
I'm just drinking a glass of wine. White wine, Sauvignon Blanc.
You're always doing that.
Well, I'm trying to be healthier. The liquor store I go to is it's one of those liquor stores. It's not fancy, and you walk in and it's just like the selection at this liquor store is like a blindfolded monkey picked it out. It's just like some of it's really good and a great value, and other of it's like, why the fuck is that in here? You have a space the size of a closet. Why did you put that to put in here? It's very odd. But a great thing about it is they have a punch card. So every punch, you get 10 punches, you get 10% off your entire next order or purchase.
Ooh, so you buy single beers.
Exactly.
And then when you need to actually buy it, you can stock it all up.
That's what I do. And then this girl works there who I think is attracted to me, but she might also be one of those girls who's just like attracted to every man. She's just like quasi cute, and also you work in a liquor store, so no thank you. Excuse me to anyone who works in a liquor store. But
we just lost our only viewer.
I'm sorry. And so I give her the card, get my 10% off, and she's like muttering to herself. I'm like, I don't know what. I'm like, what are you saying? And she's like, and I'm like, what are you saying? And she's like, oh, you just keep it. Just keep it. I'll give you 10% off. Just keep it. And I'm like, we went through all that trouble. Just take the damn card. Like, I don't care that much. So I was just like, yeah, the owner's right behind you. The owner's right behind you. You can keep your card and use it next time to get 10% off. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. But that whole conversation took like 2 minutes because I didn't know what she was saying. Oh, and apparently awkward. It was so awkward. And so now I'm like, I go and I see her, and like there's two of them. I go to the cashier that like doesn't have her at it. I'm like, I just want to have a normal transaction. Just a normal transaction, please. Thank you. Just give me my alcohol for 10%. Yeah, it's just kind of odd. But they have a spin wheel. You can spin this wheel, and like you can like land on 10% off, or you can land on a trivia question, and they flip through this book and pick the easiest trivia questions possible, and you get like a free thing of Southern Comfort. That's the airplane size.
That's less fun.
That's fun. And it's just so that's where my wine is from. Not great. Character has character.
You made it into a mildly interesting story, so there's that.
Mildly. That's 4 out of 10.
Here's my drink. And let me preface this by saying I got pretty drunk yesterday, and I'm doing this for the fans. I don't really want to be drinking right now, but I'm going to be humming a different tune once I get halfway through this thing. So, Scott, this is what it looks like. It is a vaguely pink-looking liquid. And here's the story. So there's this place that is near my apartment. It's called Tequila and Mezcal. And I think I might have mentioned it in a previous
You mentioned it a couple
episode.
times.
Yeah, and they have really good cricket tacos, but they also have these really, really good mezcal-based drinks. And I really wanted to try to make my own twist on one of these drinks. And so what I did was I bought this really smoky mezcal that's called, I'm going to butcher this, but Pelton de la Muerte. And then I bought this, I believe it is a jalapeno infused rum. It's called Chacho. And
that sounds good. Rum,
I
though?
put in 2 parts of the mezcal to 1 part of the rum. And then I put in some agave syrup and some bitters. And the bitters are what makes it a little bit pink looking. And it tastes really, really good. I also had a bunch of friends over yesterday, and I made this for all of them. And one of the girls didn't really like it, so I ended up drinking double. And so I ended up with a massive headache this morning, which is why it's kind of a struggle for me to get through this right now. But that's my drink.
That looks really good.
It's really good. When you come over here, maybe we'll splurge and buy these liquors again.
So it's called Peloton de la Muerte. Peloton, like Peloton. Spelled like that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what that word means, but of death is the latter part of it. Mm-hmm. Cycle of death. Cycle of death.
There we go.
I like it. That's a good name.
Yeah, it is. It's a great name.
I have a story for you. So I get restless. I get really restless. I was getting restless today. I bought a house essentially to keep me occupied, so I don't start, doing unproductive things.
Meth.
I'm like meth. I mean, damn it, I have an addictive personality. I wouldn't start, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, you got to start with cocaine and then work your way up.
So I bought this house mostly so I can fiddle with things. I'm being honest with myself. But it's been a year and 2 months. I'm getting tired of fiddling with things. And I told myself I wasn't going to travel for a year because of the money situation with the house, because it costs so much. Now it's been a year. I'm like, okay, I can travel again. Going to Austin. That's not long. That's only a weekend though. So I'm like, I need to do something big and crazy. Big and crazy. So, and cheap. Big, crazy, and cheap. And you combine those, you get some interesting things. So what I'm doing, I went online yesterday and I'm like, where's cheap airfare? Anything out of the country is expensive. I was looking really cheap. I was looking for like under $400. And I'm like, nah, the Caribbean you could maybe get there under $400, but like the flight times were shitty. I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. San Diego. Going to San Diego. $250 round trip.
Really?
Flying to San Diego, immediately crossing the border on foot into Tijuana. In Tijuana. I'm going to rent a car for a week.
Oh my God.
And I am going to drive 800 miles through the desert of the Baja California Peninsula with my backpack and tent and camp on the beaches. What you can do.
This sounds simultaneously like an amazing and a terrible idea.
I'm doing it. I booked tickets are booked. It's done. I'm going.
First off, are you sure that's safe?
No, it's not safe. I'm going on roads where there's no gas station for 200 miles. You have to bring gas with you.
And there are cartels.
Not in the Baja. Not in the Baja. No.
You sure?
It's too dry and
you're going to Tijuana. That's the most dangerous city in the world.
Oh yeah. I'm leaving Tijuana immediately. I'm going out and I'm going into the desert. There's nothing there. It's nothing.
Wait, I might have to fact check this, but I'm pretty sure Tijuana has the highest death rate of any city in the world.
Okay, well, I'm not vacationing in Tijuana.
List of cities by murder rate. Tijuana ranks number 1. Guess the number of homicides per 100,000 per year in Tijuana.
500.
No, 138. But it's still the highest in the world. Second is Acapulco. And then the third is Caracas in Venezuela. And then the next 3 after that are all also in Mexico. And then the 7th one is also in Venezuela. Man, South America is like really... South and Central America just hitting...
It's the drug... They kill each other, Steve. So they don't kill
everything
tourists.
From number 1 to number 14 is in Central and South America. Then number 15 is not. Can you guess what number 15 is?
Detroit.
St. Louis.
It's Close.
But St. Louis at number 15 is 61 deaths per 100,000 per year. That's less than half of what Tijuana is. I'm surprised Baltimore's so low. Baltimore's 23. I would have thought it would be higher. It's so weird that St. Louis is higher than Baltimore.
St. Louis has a history of that. So
anyway, back to your
trip. Here's the best. I think one of the best parts. Death Valley was amazing. This is Death Valley on steroids. I'm getting an SUV. I'm getting a Jeep. I'm renting a Jeep, and I am driving onto these back roads for hundreds of miles where no one has been for like a week, and and you can pull over and the ocean's right there. You can get out and you just go swim. Right in the bay.
That part does sound amazing.
And keep driving. It's desert. There's cacti. You can just camp wherever you want. You roll up to like a little gas station. They're serving fish tacos. Like, it is going to be so fucking fun.
I'm just really nervous about the idea of you doing this by yourself.
You're invited.
How can you afford to take so much time off?
I work for government.
Yeah, I guess
that's how they pay me. I can take whenever I want off.
Man. Well, I hope you don't die, and I hope you have a great time.
I'll be fine. It's going to be... I'm going to bring tons of books and beer. Get a cooler full of ice, put my Coronas in it.
Man,
drink a beer
this
while
podcast will not get off the ground ever if you die on this trip. Really
I won't die.
Yeah, I don't really fuck over the podcast. Please don't.
The only way I would die is if I ran out of water. And I'll make sure I have lots of water with me.
Yeah, bring more than you need, and don't hike too far from your car. Yeah. Well, it does sound super exciting. Want to talk about the book of questions?
Let's go for it.
So after every book review, what we do is we pull out the book of questions.
I didn't actually know that. Is that the case?
That is the case. That's why we're doing the book of questions.
Well, it's good because I feel pretty stupid this evening, so more than usual. This is a good option.
All right, so the book of questions is a book of 300 questions, which actually only comes with 291 questions. The way it works is I have the book. Scott does not have the book. I have not read through the questions, so Scott will randomly give me a number, and then I will read off the question, and then we will answer. We will give our responses for that question. If it's a question that we've happened to have done on a previous episode, we'll skip it. But otherwise, any question is fair game.
We've done this twice before, I think. Two times, 3 times. 2
times. We've done this twice.
The book of questions is like opening your... No, that's a bad analogy. It's like getting... Okay, maybe you didn't like these, but those chocolate oranges in your stocking in Christmas. Yeah, the ones you smash and it breaks open. I love those. I love the element of violence and sugar. It was just such a great combination. It gave me a rush. The book of questions is like that. It's like, yes, we have that chocolate orange now. We have the book of questions. I can sit back and I can relax with the book of questions.
It's nice too because the book club episodes are pretty stressful because you're trying to actually remember what you read over the last few weeks, and you're trying to be able to explain it in a concise manner, and you know that you're never able to fully express the information gleaned from the book. And so it's really stressful, and it's really nice to be able to turn around after that and just be like, all right, let's just wing it with the book of questions episode, you know?
Yeah.
So, Scott, give me a number.
So, okay, I'm going to try to make it a number I haven't picked before. Because I only know a couple numbers between 1 and 298. 249.
All right. This is a long one. A cave-in occurs while you and an acquaintance are exploring a concrete armory deep beneath the ground in an old converted mine shaft, as one does.
Cool.
You learn that the entire shaft is now sealed and an air hole being drilled won't reach you for 15 hours. If you both take sleeping pills from a medicine chest to slow your metabolism, the oxygen will still last only 10 hours. There's no way for you both to survive, but one of you probably could. What would you do if the other person took a sleeping pill motioned toward a loaded pistol, said it was up to you, and nodded off.
I'd kill them. It's an acquaintance. It said acquaintance.
True.
Come on. An acquaintance? Acquaintances are a dime a dozen.
Yeah, especially one who's so willingly
What a stupid premise.
going to give you that option.
Oh, I would shoot him in two... Who would say otherwise? If they say otherwise, they'd be lying.
Yeah, if you're really in that circumstance, anybody would pick up the pistol.
Yeah. That's not even a philosophical question.
Yeah, I mean, even if the person didn't take the sleeping pill and I knew that we only each had 10 hours, I'd slip it to him and then shoot him.
Oh, I'd shoot him without slipping it to him. Why waste a good sleeping pill?
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, you're going to need them for a few weeks.
He's dead whether he's asleep or not.
That is true. What a boring question.
186.
When was the last time you stole something? Why haven't you stolen anything since? Is there anything you'd steal if you were certain you wouldn't get caught?
Oh, this is actually a really interesting question. I'm not sure if I want the answer to this completely on the podcast. I have really no compunction about stealing. I really don't.
Yeah, I know.
Very, very little. I think we've talked about this. The last thing I stole, usually it's a steal of convenience. It's like, I want that one little thing. I already bought something from you today. I don't want to stand in line again. Oh, actually, the last thing I stole was yesterday. I was in the bulk section. But who doesn't steal from the bulk section?
What constitutes stealing in the bulk section? Does grabbing a couple raisins and eating those constitute stealing?
Well, technically, I think that would count as stealing. But I'm talking more about big chunks of chocolate from the bulk section.
Let's say, what's the last thing that you stole which wasn't some food where it's kind of ambiguous whether or not you can sample?
I was at Whole Foods, and I hate Amazon. I think Amazon is well, I don't hate.
Doesn't justify stealing, but continue.
I don't hate it. I'm like, you know what? I really want that protein bar. I took the protein bar.
When was this?
That was like last week.
How frequently does this happen?
Once a month or so.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I had no idea that you were going around stealing shit.
Going around once a month is not going around.
It's not like you can't afford these things.
No, I would never. Now here's the thing, I would never, ever, ever take anything without paying. I overpay at local stores. I went to the bookstore the other day, I wanted books. I went to a brand new bookstore down my street. Sells brand new books. You can get them for half price online. And I'm like, I'm going to buy 3 of your books for full price because I want to support you. See, I think there's a big ethical piece to this. I don't think it's stealing or not stealing. It's so, I don't know. People get so wound up about it, and yet they go out and then they do horrendous things that everyone thinks is fine. Like drive too fast and text while they drive. There's a lot more danger in that, and I don't do that. I think it's very relative. And I like it because it's a practice for me in this kind of exercise of thinking about how is it relative to other things. I think it's a very interesting mind exercise.
I think it's interesting how you're trying to justify it, but you're still stealing something. And there is still an economic implication for the owner of the store, right? If everybody kept stealing things as consistently as you would, then that's a pretty good cut into the gains of that institution.
Yeah, but they don't.
They don't, but that's also a question of whether or not you should engage within society as a good citizen or not.
I don't think it's about that. Look, so it's a value judgment. Would I, for example, if I were in a situation, you had to litter or you had to steal, I would steal any day because I care so much less about the profit margins of Amazon than I do about the state of the environment. I so do not care. I so care so little.
So would you still be comfortable stealing if it was at a local grocery store?
Never. Absolutely never.
So only larger companies you would be willing to steal from?
Publicly traded companies, I would say.
Okay. That's interesting. Do you feel like part of it is the thrill?
Oh, yeah. I tell you, see, so I have to go on these week-long solo backpacking trips. It keeps me sane.
I can see you're kind of crazy.
You knew that.
Yeah. For me, I mean, like, when's the last time I stole something? Legit stole something, not taken one of the grapes out of the grape bag at the grocery store? Because that doesn't really count.
That doesn't count.
It's been years. Years and years.
You stole something when I was with you. I think I convinced you to do it.
What did you convince me to steal?
It was like at a grocery store. I don't remember now. It was like pretty insignificant. Oh, I remember what it was. There were cookies, these boxes of cookies, and we took cookies from one box and put more into the other box that you bought. You remember that?
When did this happen?
It was for a barbecue or something. There's like there's not enough cookies in the box. And I'm like, oh, Steve, just take some of those and put it in this box.
Oh, God. I'm vaguely remembering this.
And you did it.
And feeling incredibly uncomfortable and succumbing to the peer pressure anyway.
He did it.
That's my problem. Sometimes I'm really bad with peer pressure, and it just really triggers something in me, and I'm like, yeah, fuck it, I'll do it. Why not? Screw the consequences. But usually, I'm not a proponent of stealing. I will not steal anything. But here's the thing. I don't think that my reasoning for avoiding stealing is so much some higher moral conscience. I don't think it's that at all. I think I'm just more uncomfortable with the feeling. Like, the act of it feels like an exciting thrill to you. It feels incredibly nerve-wracking and uncomfortable to me. And I think that it's more just that the feeling is uncomfortable than I'm a better, more sound person.
I agree with that. I work for a government. I need my thrills. I work in a beige wonderland under fluorescent lights. Just let me steal that protein bar once a month, please. Just let me do it. Thank you.
Yeah, the other stuff you do offsets it. It's fine.
I am a civil servant, and I give tirelessly to help the residents of Hennepin County. That is true. That's true. That's true. I'm very passionate about what I do.
Yeah. I mean, you're already stealing from the taxpayers with your salary. You might as well steal a little more. All right, next question.
43. 43.
Oh, boy. This is
good.
A whole episode.
Oh,
Which
boy.
Which sex has it easier in our culture? Okay, when we say culture, what does that mean? Because it really depends in which dimensions you're measuring that. Because there are certain dimensions in which it's very obvious that men have it a lot easier. There are other dimensions in which it's very obvious that women have it a lot easier. Right?
What are the dimensions that women have it a lot easier?
There's the question of, like, what stays within the confines of culture. Because if you think about marriage law and the legal structure around divorce settlements, women have it highly tilted in their favor. If you think about cultural expectations of sexual advances, women have it a lot easier.
Well, how do you mean? How do you mean by that?
In terms of which one?
Of the one you just said, sexual advances.
Okay, yeah. Here's a statement that at first I think you might resist, but then come around to understanding my opinion on. Okay, so Every story you've heard of where a guy pulls out his penis in front of a woman is an unwanted act of sexual harassment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly inappropriate.
Yep.
And yet there are times on talk shows where women have turned back to the camera, unwantingly flashed their breasts at male hosts or correspondents, met with wild applause and acceptance of that being a truly empowering feminine act, instead of seeing it as a gross kind of like impingement on the guy's space.
That is a minute example, and that is aberration. So come up with another example.
No, my point here isn't about like how many times does this happen. My point is that because we're talking about culture, the cultural norms around a woman's right to take on that kind of action versus a man's right to take on that action is fundamentally skewed. Like, I don't think that that's a controversial statement.
Well, yeah, I don't think it is. But now, what if a woman would take that on a kind of a regular basis and made it more a normal part of her life? She'd be labeled. What would she be labeled? You know, if a guy does that, there's just a red-blooded young American. So
that's not true. That's not true.
Yeah,
not even a little.
Maybe
bit.
not in D.C., but in a lot of the country, yeah.
No, a guy who goes around flashing himself and making those kinds of actions in front of women is seen very negatively on society. Don't make a caricature of this unknown segment of society that allows for men to flaunt their penises. That doesn't really exist.
I wasn't going there. I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about sexual advances, not the extremes of it. I don't think talking about the extremes of it is very useful.
But I think that there is a very different dynamic between the way that sexual advances by men are taken versus sexual advances by women.
I think different is the right word.
Here's the thing, right? So I just want to say this because, and I might just cut this whole thing from the podcast, and we can have a new, entirely different podcast about it. But it's an incredibly simplistic assumption to say that there is a unidirectional skew in this dynamic that exists in our society. Because what that does is it devoids the conversation of nuance, and it fails to recognize that this is an incredibly complex societal property that has emerged through decades and decades and centuries of cultural dynamics between men and women. It's such a flagrant misrepresentation to say all sexual dynamics are a power dynamic of the patriarchy where men are imposing their sexuality on women and no repercussion to them. And that's all it is.
Am I saying that?
I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I think that I hear this a lot, and it's incredibly frustrating because what I'm saying is not that in the universe of sexual dynamics that men have it harder. That's absurd because on many, many dimensions, men have it so much easier. But it's also just as flagrant to say that in these valid dimensions where things are uneven in the opposite direction, that fuck it, I'm gonna hand wave that concept away because I'm gonna assume that it happens rarely, or that compared to these other more pressing issues it doesn't matter. Like I think we have to have a more clear-eyed approach to what are these dynamics and what do they mean, where are the inequities in them, and how do we approach them one by one instead of using them as a balancing scale of which one deserves more attention.
You know the T-chart, pluses are delta plus or whatever, like you add up both sides, see which one comes out ahead?
Yeah.
If you were to take all the advantages that were afforded humans in America, and you can't, there are millions and millions and millions of them, so there's no way you could quantify this. Who do you think would come out ahead in terms of the standard definition of success?
What's the standard definition of success?
what is the American dream? It's to go out and it's to make a living and it is to support your family and it is to be proud and successful of the work you're doing and to be treated as an equal citizen under the law.
I think that the notion of success isn't well defined enough to be able to make that statement, and two, the dimensions are too complex to say obviously one side or the other.
Right.
I think that it's a very, very difficult question. It's possible on certain dimensions to be able to say men have it easier, women have it easier. I think that when you're considering the totality of, in this question, this concept of culture, it's really, really hard to make that assumption, because what matters more, right? The ability to make a good living versus the ability to live a long, healthy life without mental health issues, for instance, right? I don't know which was more important. I don't think it's obvious.
That is true. At the same time, the measures that are easily measurable, which limits you significantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would be very hard pressed to find a preponderance of those coming out in favor of women.
I disagree.
Examples?
Yeah, mortality rate, rates of depression and suicide. There are many factors in which women come out on top. A rate of acceptance and graduation in higher education.
Well, and this gets
this is the complexity issue where it's like so many people just keep saying that, oh, look at earnings, look at standard of living, look at the positions of people in quote unquote like powerful positions, right? CEOs, executives,
Steve,
whatnot.
that's what I'm saying. That's what success is in this culture. That's what it is in this culture. Success is not your rate of depression. Success in this culture is money and career advancement.
I disagree.
Point me to an example that contradicts that Americans define success as a whole as success in career advancement, because we elected a president off of that.
So here's again where the nuance is important, right? Each person defines success differently. Okay, so in a lot of ways, success is much more dependent on general happiness based on social connections, family structure, and general day-to-day standard of living, right?
I'm not talking about how you define success. I'm talking about how this country defines success. I'm not saying I don't agree with it.
But Scott, what you're doing is you're framing the notion of success based on standard masculine traits and then saying, look at how much better men are doing. But it's also correlated with the fact that the things that men go toward tend to be much more tied to those exact masculine areas of success that you're shining and assuming are part of what society says are the most successful.
I understand what you're saying. I'm saying if you shifted the goalposts of success, the outcomes would look a lot different. But what I'm saying is, whether it's good or bad, is that this country, this culture, both men and women, define success as money and career advancement as a whole. If you took the whole, that's how it's defined. That is America. That is this country. That is the culture. Are there other, probably better ways to define success? Yeah. Yeah, there are.
So I understand where you're coming from. The question from the book is which sex has it easier in our culture. It's not necessarily which one has the highest potential for the most culturally accepted notion of success.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, because being easy is also relative, right? So as a male, I'm not saying you or I'm just saying kind of generalized. I'm just talking out here. If you make a lot of money and have a really great career, or if you're a female and you make a lot of money and have a really great career, are you going to say you're successful? You're probably going to say you're successful.
But you're still tying this back to success and not the question, which is, which sex has it easier in our culture?
And so if both would define that as success, and you looked at the numbers of people who achieved that level of success.
But I don't think so. You're rephrasing the question
more?
though. That's not the question. The question is
easy.
Which one is
That's
success?
a easy. What if you ask them if you had it easy or not? More men would say they had it easy, and more women would say men had it easy.
I'm just saying that it's a lot more complicated than, look at careers, and therefore we can say that men have it easier. Because here's the flip side of this that is like such a starkly obvious fact, is that many, many more men volunteer to go into positions of high physical strain and high risk of mortality. There's no way that some upper middle class woman is going to have a more difficult life than a U.S. Marine. And high 90s is the percentage of military people who are men, right? And so it's not that obvious to say that women have it easier. Now, here's the thing, right? The most viable argument for why women have it harder is that if we're talking about just the universe of people having a family, it's like the woman's going to have a lot harder of a time because they're going to have to go through pregnancy and then all of the related dynamics around that. And that's just hard. That's super hard.
You may not say that's hard. It depends how you define hard. That could be fun and enjoyable.
Oh yeah, no, not discounting that it would be fun and enjoyable. But in terms of just the pure physical strain on your body, lack of sleep, like all of that compounds. And this is why I find it obnoxious when guys say we are pregnant. It's okay for the girl to say we are pregnant, but it's a girl who's going through all of this crazy difficult shit. And so a guy should never say we are pregnant, because you have no fucking idea what's going on. And it's incredibly difficult for the woman. And even after the birth as well. Like, we don't like to admit it, but oftentimes the woman ends up having to take on a lot more responsibility than the man does for child rearing.
So I approach this more from what would other people say or think, and I think the culture as a whole, America as a whole, would say men have it easier. I think that's it. So in some ways, it's quite relative. It's like if you say it and think it, it's true. And when you talk about culture, that kind of is how it is. It's like if you say it and think it, that is the truth, right? Because it's when you come to these kind of things, you don't really have an ultimate truth. It just depends on how you measure what the goalpost is, right? It totally depends how you measure and define success.
It does.
It totally depends. It is so individualistic. At the same time, it talks about culture, and culture is talking about the national psyche, and on that level, and I get to the easy part, but on that level, yes, men do have it easier if you're talking about like national psyche, this national idea of success equating to power, to pay, to career success. The number is pretty irrefutable in that regard. Now, when you talk about easy, that's where it gets really interesting, because easy is also extremely subjective. Because you could go, I was just saying with childbirth, you could say that's hard, yes, but it's also extremely enjoyable for many women. Like, as a whole, it's one they want to have. They want to experience that pain of giving birth. In some ways, that could be defined as some level of easy, or that's how you want it to happen. It's how you want it. You want it to go that way. That's how you want it to happen. Other women are like, fuck no. I don't want it to happen like that. That's not going to happen like that. I don't want to feel any pain at all. So like easy and like how you want it to happen, which I guess is how I define easy, not necessarily easy as in terms of like its simplicity, is also extremely subjective. And I also think on a national psyche level, easy goes to men, because it's a lot easier for men to claim success than it is for women to claim. And the key word there is claim. The key word is claim. Claim success. It's much easier for men to claim success.
I see what you're saying, and I think it's a really interesting take to say, if you look at what the national psyche leans toward, it leans toward assuming that men have it easier. And my point is that despite this assumption, there is not enough data, and the dimensionality of this question is so complex that there's actually not an obvious answer of which sex has it easier. It's not like I've experienced life as a woman and as a man and can objectively assess this. That's just not possible. And even as a man, I'm going to have a very different experience than, say, you would, Scott, or most other people in this world. And so there are so many factors that go into this that make it really, really difficult. And so you can look on one dimension, which is like the experience of being able to walk down a street, right? And it's so obviously in favor of men. It's like, as a man, you can walk down a street at any point in time, not really have to worry about any kind of physical violence or sexual assault, and that's fine. As a woman, you could be walking down and regularly expect on your commute home to be engaged with at least one person making an inappropriate sexual advance. Like, that's something that certain women will experience on a daily basis. And so it's so obviously like skewed on one side, where it's like, in this dimension, it's very obvious that women have a much harder time than men do, right? On the other side, you can think about, for instance, divorce settlements, right? Where you have a man and a woman who are married, they're getting a divorce, and then you can think about how the settlement is expected to pay out, and overwhelmingly money and child support and custody of the child goes leaning so heavily in the woman's favor, and the court system is leaning in a very obvious way against men, right? And so in this dimension now, it's like really obvious to say like, oh, men have it a lot harder than women do when you're looking at divorce settlements, right? And so like it's all so dependent on which exact dimension. And all I'm saying is like, it's really too simplistic to assume that we know how to aggregate all of those different experiences and say that it's clear who has it easier one way or another. If you actually look into the data around the gender pay gap, right? The gender pay gap is currently assumed that it's 70 some odd cents to the dollar in favor of men. Now, what most people don't realize is that that statistic is not counting for differentiation across different fields and is not accounting for number of hours worked. And there have been a lot of models that significantly reduce that gap when you do make those stratifications. And that research has been put out there and published. And so it's really misleading to say that it's obviously and only structural oppression based on sexism that causes a gender pay gap, because the data doesn't support it. If you have the data to support it, let's see it, but it doesn't. Like, time and time again, people have run the numbers, and the data actually does not support this notion of a very obvious gender pay gap. And so then the question becomes, okay, so what are other dimensions that are causing this? And what you tend to find is that men put in a significant amount of additional hours when compared to women in a certain job, and men tend to gravitate towards certain careers that tend to pay higher. And so that becomes complicated, because you then have to ask the question, okay, so are there structural reasons why, whether it's because of the way that we engage with men and women when they're kids, we are pushing women away from certain fields? Maybe that's part of it. Okay, so let's figure out how much of it is that, and let's make sure that we're not restricting those opportunities to people from an early age. And maybe some of it is based on like certain women wanting to be able to commit time towards starting a family at a certain critical point in their career, and having to take maternity leave, and that having an effect. And then we have to have a serious question about, okay, what does that mean? We need to make sure that women have a chance to get into the workforce. But what does that actually mean when you're comparing someone who's been out of the workforce for a couple of years versus someone who's in the workforce? And it's complicated.
I would generally agree with that. I will say that throwing out studies, I am suspect of any study, be it peer reviewed or not. So I think maybe the future in the podcast, if we talk about studies and facts, and we've both done this, we should post links to them somewhere, because as someone who has done policy research, you can change a very small thing in your model and show opposite results. And if you have, and I'm not saying this specific ones you are talking about, Steve, but in general, be it liberal or conservative approach, if you have an ingrained bias, you can unwittingly alter the data in a way that supports the argument that you unwittingly are trying to make, unconsciously trying to make. So I'm cautious of studies. I think the majority of studies do support a gender wage gap. But regardless, I think the idea that you can ever come to an ultimate conclusion is false. You can't, because it's too relative. I think it's just far too relative. And there are far too many facts and far too many figures to even begin to computate from a social science standpoint on what would have it easier. And there's the whole issue of definitions, which are also completely subjective.
Yeah, like what does easier mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I do think that as a whole, in the current system, and when I say system, I mean included in that culture and the laws, there's a lot of, this is why we're doing this. With the adoption case, we do it this way because we have done research that shows that children with mothers do better. And I'm not saying that, I'm not quoting actual research, but I'm saying that's how policy decisions are made. It's that we did research at one point. People who are doing this research, by and large, had this idea that, women are better caretakers. And so perhaps there is some bias in the research, or it's just some bias in general that supports a legal system that gives mothers the custody of the child. That's how policy is made. It's not, these decisions are not made with some golden rule. They're not. They're made through iterations of studies that have been informed by people with biases, etc.
But that's where it's interesting and complicated, because let's say there was research done that said that children with single mothers tend to do better than children with single fathers. Is it fair then that the current system skews toward women? Well, fair in what dimension? Is it fair in terms of giving the child the best opportunity toward a healthy life? Maybe. Maybe we do decide that in this dimension, it actually makes sense to deliberately skew the system in that way, because the metric in which we're trying to measure fairness is based on the child's success.
I want to say on studies and research, but this is it really just in general bothers me when people start quoting studies without having actually looked at the methodology behind the studies. Because what happens in research is, and I've seen this many, many times. I've said, this is like what you get drilled into your mind in policy school. Is like you'll have this one body of research, this one author, and they'll do their research, and someone later will come along and say that methodology is completely wacko and crap.
Yeah.
But because it fits into the narrative of the culture at the time, or the narrative of a subset of the culture at the time, that study, based on its original methodology, gets replicated again and again and again and again and again and again by different authors, to the point where it actually becomes the truth. Wherein the methodology isn't accurate. So when you say a preponderance, even if it were the case that a preponderance of research showed that there was a gender pay, it wasn't a gender pay, and you can pick anything. I don't care if it's a gender pay gap or whether the sky is blue. Saying a preponderance of research supports something doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
I completely agree, but I also want to flip this around to you, Scott, and say that it seems pretty clear to me that you haven't looked at any of this research around the gender pay gap.
I haven't. I would be happy to look at it.
In our society that assumes that a gender pay gap exists, and for anyone to say otherwise is an extremist, sexist position. That's a prevailing narrative that exists within at least the liberal end of our media and society. Wouldn't you say that it's just as fair for me to say, as someone who has at least looked at some of the research, that in this case, it seems that your resistance to accepting what I'm saying is based on your bias, based on the prevailing narrative?
I don't know. I'm not resistant to it. I'm happy. I'm always happy to change my mind. I just need a logic model. And in my mind, I cannot come up with a logic model that supports.
But you were so willing to accept the 70 cents on the dollar gender wage gap.
Well, I don't know if it's 70 cents. I don't care if it's 70, 90, 2. I don't know. 99? I don't know. It is easy for me to think about a logic model that supports a gender pay gap. There's so many ways that logic model could run, right? There's an infinite number of ways it could run. It's harder for me to define a multitude of logic models that would define absolutely zero or the opposite of a gender pay, even factoring in effort hours. It's hard for me to calculate enough logic models where that side makes more sense to me than the other. Now, if there's research that supports it, that's great, but it may also only be looking. And this is just one issue area. It could be any issue area, right? But like, you can also pick a very specific set of data to look at, right? You could pick a set of data that, you could look at wages, you could look at total compensation, you could look at lifetime earnings. All three of those are going to be different. They're going to show different stories because the vagrancies associated with each type of the data and the collection methods of that data, the reporting methods of that data. There's so many vagrancies in there. So you can pick one, but maybe if you picked another type of data, maybe if you picked, maybe lifetime earnings versus annual income, you would have a complete, you would show the opposite. Maybe you would show a gender pay gap. I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't. I don't know.
So I think the other added level of complexity here is that when certain people say, some people might say that certain variables should be considered in a model, and some people would say that those variables shouldn't be considered in a model. So for instance, some people might say that if someone goes on the maternity leave and ends up leaving for a year or 2 years, then that should have no effect on assumed career trajectory. And other people would say that it would it should have an effect that we should factor in for assumed career trajectory because you've now been out of the market. Yeah, and then how much of a
what's the coefficient?
Yeah,
what are you gonna put the coefficient?
There?
Exactly.
And so it starts getting political because then some people might say like, oh, so you're saying that a woman who goes on maternity leave and is out for a year should no longer be qualified for the same opportunities that a man would have had just because of their biology, right? And then that becomes a political question because then it becomes difficult to say like, okay, so how much should we factor in someone not being in the market for a year? It doesn't matter why. Like if somebody ends up becoming like massively depressed and an alcoholic and is gone for a year, how does that factor versus someone who's on maternity leave for a year, right? And are those different? Are they qualitatively different? Should that affect career trajectory and growth? My point being that the research that I've seen has attempted to put in stratifications based on career segments, so types. If you're in like technology versus you're in law, and once stratifying from that, factor in number of years on the job, continuous on the job, and then look at different wage differences, right? Are those the right factors to assume? I don't know, right? Because maybe it happens to be that there are just fewer lawyers in higher level positions who are women because there's a structural push to push women out of law early on. Or I mean it's very clear when you look at like STEM fields. There are many fields that are dominated by men, and it's just a lot harder for women to get in because there are no female role models. And so that's a factor, right? And so because of that, women don't go to those careers. And at the same time, a lot of behavioral research has shown that men tend to lean toward careers that are focused on things, and women tend to lean toward careers that are focused on people. And by lean toward, I don't mean all women are going to focus on people and all men are going to focus on things. It's more that the probability distributions are deviated slightly between the two. Right?
And exactly. And then you bring that up, you have to question, well, how far back do you have to look at the study? You have to look at 6-month-olds. Like, how far back do you have to determine are cultural factors pushing one sex into one field. It's not even 6. It could be before birth in some cases. Some research suggests.
It's also ridiculous to assume that there aren't biological factors that influence behavior.
There aren't, but we don't know the extent of those biological factors versus culture. I'm not disagreeing that there are. I do think there are, but we don't know. We don't know the extent of them. We don't know the coefficient on them. And that's what I'm saying. We could say, you could say when you're designing a study, I think women should get 50% bonus or extra, accounted for 50% for the time they were on maternity leave in my model I'm building. Another person could say, I want them counted for 0%. And here's why. Another person could say, I want it counted as actual years worked. And here's why. Another person may say 60%. Another person may say 20%. It's so relative. It's social science studies are so moral based. It is. Yeah. So whenever anyone says this preponderance of studies support that or that supports that, it's like, well, those people who design those studies, I'm just saying, that's the studies of studies is fascinating because it is the study of people. Let me say it this way. I have no moral inclinations for one versus the other. I don't have any political stake in it. I have no identity stake in it. I don't. In my daily life, in my interactions, in my education, I just see more examples where men have it easier in the way I define easy than women do. And I see more, when you look at outcomes, I see more. And again, I like almost logical models better than studies because logical models just, I just like them better as a way of thinking about things. I just see more paths based on this culture towards males having it easier.
Well, toward males getting the kind of success that you as a male define.
And ergo how this country defines success. Well, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying. That's another thing. When I say these things, they're not value adjustments. It's not saying that's good, that's bad. It's just saying that's how I see it.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. Is it good or bad? I don't know. But that's just how I see it.
Yeah. For me, I think it comes down to this is a really interesting debate. I really have no kind of bone in the game in terms of some wider cultural recognition one way or the other. And the way it affects me, it's like when I talk about how it's complicated and how there are certain dimensions in which men actually don't have it easier, it's not like I'm saying, oh, men have it so hard, blah, blah, blah. I'm not one of the, because in my opinion, as an individual, the way I view life comes down to you have the hand that you're dealt and you do the best that you can with it. And I personally find that the most satisfying and healthy way to live my own life isn't to think about what are all of the ways in which a world could or would disadvantage me, because that doesn't help me move forward. It doesn't make me a better person or a more satisfied person or a healthier person. The way that I improve on all of those dimensions and end up having a better life or a quote-unquote easier life is that I focus on what I can do as an individual, and I focus on how I can improve my own life and the lives of those people around me, and I take that step by step. And I think it's always interesting to acknowledge cultural systems, and it's important to critically examine them so that we can think about how we can navigate a world that does have those structures in place. But when I think about how I want to engage with the world, I think about myself as an individual and the people I engage with as individuals, and trying not to let those underlying issues impede any real progress I can make.
I don't want to say that makes a lot of sense to me. that makes a lot of sense.
Because it's not about like what is and what isn't. It's about what I can do pragmatically to move forward in life, right? It's like the world is unfair. There are shitty things that happen, and a lot of people have to deal with a lot of shit. It's like, what can you do about it? You can put one step in front of the other, and you can move forward to make your life better every day. So that's what I try to do.
And I view it as many, many people have the ability to do that. Me, you, everyone we know. There are also many people who don't have the ability to make those sort of choices, and I want to get them to a point where they can make those choices.
And the way that you do that is by improving your own lot first, and then making sure that from there you can expand your level of reach to the point that you can affect the people that you want to.
Well, I don't know about that.
Help.
I mean, I'm not. I mean, that's where government steps in, right? Because the private sector doesn't fulfill that role very well, or the nonprofit sector for that matter.
Well, I think each of these sectors has overlapping responsibilities when it comes to the betterment of people's lives, and there are many ways in which the private sector cannot actually achieve many of the requirements that certain people need because of the hand that they've been dealt. And that's where, for instance, government can step in. But it's not that the private sector doesn't achieve any of those benefits, right? The fact that most people, no matter how poor, can afford a smartphone, which gives them connection to the internet, which gives them the ability to connect and communicate with friends and potential employers is huge, and that's a private sector.
Then the challenge is that these individuals can't afford. This is what we see, Steve. This is the saddest thing. And we're really going off topic here, but people have to buy phones before they can buy food for their families. They have to have the phone. They will buy the phone and then get Cheetos for dinner. Because that's the way I see it. And again, this is, government has a big role to play, and the private sector has a much bigger role to play, and the non-private sector has a somewhat smaller role to play. Government serves three big roles. One, justice, right? The justice. That's pretty duh. The second one is delivering services such as roads, education, schools, things like that, hospitals, that the private sector doesn't necessarily have an incentive, although it's changing, to provide. And that's also pretty non-controversial. The most controversial part is providing for people who need to step up. Because what does it mean to need a step up? Whose role is that? Is it the individuals or is it governments? That's where I fall on the side of, yes, if you really need to step up, there are systematic things oppressing you. I'll use the example of women versus men. Some women, yes, perhaps you do need to take leave of some services, some steps up, be it in the justice system or where have you, to take full advantage of the private sector. What I want to do is get people off of government. I don't want people using government. I want you out. Go be productive citizens and go screw all this up and go make good choices and bad choices. But
ideally, it's a temporary stopgap to empower you to be able to provide for yourself.
Right, and I think maybe that's partly where I'm coming from this debate, this conversation from is if people can duke it out by themselves, that's awesome. But we need to get people there first. Many people there first. We need to get them to that stage.
I completely agree because even if you're going to be the most callous asshole, you have to realize that a productive society requires independent individual citizens to run.
Right.
You need people to be self-reliant so that they can support themselves, they can support their family, and they can contribute to the economy. And even if you don't really give a shit about everyone else, eventually what that does is it builds a productive society that has innovation and growth, and that benefits you as a member of that society. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this experiment of society together, and if we can't support for those who are dealt the worst hand, then our society is going to start to crumble from the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're going to have increased homelessness, increased violence. You're going to have a reduction in the pool of intelligent and capable labor. That's going to affect businesses. It's going to affect the prospects for innovation. It's going to affect future investment perspectives within the country. It all falls down. So that's why, even from the purely kind of opportunistic standpoint, you need those social services. You need to be able to support people to get them to the point that they can be self-reliant. Anyway, do you want to move on to another question?
That was way. That was like a podcast in a podcast.
I know. Let's move on.
It's great talking to you, dude. You have very. You challenge me, and I appreciate that.
You too. It's. I think that here's the interesting thing is I think we've gotten a lot better at this. I think that the podcast has helped. I felt like that was a much more reasoned, productive conversation than, say, the immortality debate that we had in our second episode, which was just a clusterfuck of us yelling at each other, right? And so if you go listen to that and then you listen to this, you'll notice how much we've improved.
I had to stop myself a couple of times from speaking over you, but I didn't do as well. But
and I definitely spoke over you sometimes, which I apologize for. But I'm gonna edit it in post to make it sound like you weren't talking. Give me another question.
73.
73. Would you have one of your fingers removed surgically if it somehow guaranteed you immunity from all major diseases? I'm going to switch this up because that's too easy. The obvious answer is yes, but let's say it had to be your thumb on your dominant hand and you can't get a prosthetic.
Well, I would say it wasn't such an easy question because disease. Now, how many people die of a disease? Is cancer a disease? I don't think is cancer a disease?
I would say cancer counts as a disease.
But disease has a specific medical definition, does it not?
No, I think disease is a broad term. You're thinking like viruses or bacteria. Those are very specific.
I'm looking up the definition of disease because I'm actually very curious what it actually... Oh, it's actually very broad. A disease is a particular abnormal condition that negatively affects the structure or function of part or all of an organism. That's pretty broad.
Okay, so let's say that we're talking not physical injuries, but any kind of chronic illness that you might get, as well as any of the standard acute, like flu, anything like that you get in your life that's less fatal. So let's say like heart disease if you're at risk for a stroke, or cancer if you're at risk for that, or diabetes or Alzheimer's, all that stuff is included.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, you don't die of heart disease. You die of a heart attack, that isn't a disease. I know that. Well, okay. Here's my.
Well, the lines are complicated because the heart disease
leads to the heart attack.
It does, but then what constitutes the disease? Is it? Does that mean that if I have my finger surgically removed, then I can eat steak every day and it won't clog my arteries? Right? Do my arteries get clogged or not? Like I need to know.
Are clogged arteries a disease?
That's the question, right? Like, does that count? Because at the same time, it's like, okay, when you get lung cancer from smoking, if you don't get diseases, does that mean when you smoke in cigarettes that the tar just magically disappears? Right. Like, what are the kind of dynamics that are happening at play to allow you to avoid these diseases?
I mean, if it would mean I could have sex with anyone I ever wanted and not worry about AIDS at all.
Yes, it would mean that.
Now, here's the question. Would I be less attractive if I were missing my thumb?
A little bit, but not significantly.
What about prosthetics?
I've reframed the scope of the question where you're losing the thumb on your dominant hand and you aren't allowed to get a prosthetic. So you're going to be four-fingered on your right hand for the rest of your life. And that's pretty inconvenient. Yeah, like, can you even write like that? Like, that would be...
No, you have to go like this. You have to grab it like a fist.
Yeah, that would be really hard. Like, I'm trying to hold a pen right now, missing a thumb, and it's quite difficult. And it's not impossible, but then the other thing is I would have to learn to type without my thumb, which is not terribly difficult because I have two thumbs. And for me, I would lose my left thumb because I'm left-handed, but there are certain things that I actually do on my right hand, even though I'm left-handed, so I could probably get by. I would still say yes, if we're talking the broadest possible scope of diseases.
I don't know if I'd say yes or no until I had a definitive answer to how it will impact my longevity. Because I don't know, with my lifestyle, I could die getting hit by a car. I don't know.
But here's kind of what I'm assuming.
And I don't get sick very often.
What I'm assuming is that if you're saying you're getting rid of all diseases, then you're getting rid of most of the causes of death in later life, and therefore, by definition, you're extending your longevity.
Well, here's the thing, because usually you do just die of a disease. Most people die of a disease.
Yeah.
If you are really, really old and in great health, I think you eventually do just die. I think you eventually do die of a disease, even though if it's put down of like cause of death, old age, even if you're like 115.
Exactly. So does this mean you can just not die? Is telomere shrinking with inaccurate copying of your cells considered a disease? And is that not a problem anymore? Is reduced levels of NAD+, which disrupts your mitochondria, considered the disease? Because if you can remove those two pathways toward aging, like that'll put you a long way towards getting into your 100+ years. You know?
Okay, if yes, I lose my thumb. If it was a much narrower definition, then no.
What if it's like you're gonna live to 80 regardless, and in one version you might be disease-ridden, and the other one you won't be?
I'd probably keep my thumb.
Fair. If it was constrained to that level, I think I agree with you. Just keep the thumb.
Yeah.
I can deal with a couple colds. Doesn't change the length of time I have on this earth.
Right. Okay.
I'd rather have a thumb.
239. 239.
You just have to pick a random number. I don't know why it's so hard for you. 239?
Oh, Steve, this is why. Because, like, my mind defaults to very common numbers.
How old were you when you first had sex? Do you think you'd have been better off if you had waited longer or started earlier?
I was old. Well, I can answer the latter part better. I mean, earlier.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I started pretty late. Later than you. So.
That's actually hard to believe.
Really?
Sorry.
I'm pretty sure. Oh, most definitely later than you. Most definitely.
You get so much more horny than I do. And also, you're straight, which makes, like, there's just less self-questioning.
Were you questioning your sexuality in high school?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Elementary school, but I didn't know what it meant. I think in elementary school, I don't remember that. I remember, this is not the question, but I remember jacking off thinking about girls in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also men. I can't remember though. Anyway, earlier, yes, because I didn't lose my virginity until summer of freshman year of college. So I was 19, I don't know, 18, 19?
For me, it was fall of sophomore year of college, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't that big of a difference. That's only 3 months.
That's true. That's true. It was pretty late for both of us.
It was.
I would
yeah.
say that. Definitely would have been better to have started earlier because by the time So, the thing is, I don't think it's particularly unusual to lose your virginity in your last year of high school or your first year of college. Right? Those are pretty common. But if you pass your first year of college and are now approaching either a summer or the second year of college, you're starting to freak out a little bit. You're sweating. You're like, is this ever going to happen? And I better not be that guy who goes through college and doesn't have sex, because then it just becomes harder and harder and more awkward, right? And so for me, it was like a sloppy get this done kind of situation. And I felt terrible about it, by the way. I was such an asshole. I had sex with this girl, and then I basically didn't talk to her for several weeks.
Nice. And on our campus, there was less than 2,000 people all 4 years. So, like, you kind of run into people. You can't just ignore them.
Yeah.
You see them.
Yeah.
You see them. You see them.
What was your experience? The vineyard?
The vineyard, the tent. I lost my virginity in a tent. We both worked at the bookstore. She was, at that point, I was a freshman. She was a senior in college, and she seemed so old. And now I interact with seniors in college, and like, you're a fucking moron.
You're a child.
Just
a child.
And I was like, oh my god. But she was cute and nice body, and we talked about books, and it wouldn't have happened had we not both been stuck on an island together. Because it's like, what are you going to do? I mean, you're in a confined island, slim picket, because most attractive people coming in are tourists, right? So they're there for a couple of days and they leave again.
Yeah.
I was there for the whole summer, worked together. Yeah. And then I don't know. Her parents, she lived, it's hard to describe. I mean, you know the vineyard, Steve, but kind of in a rural, not in the town part of the vineyard, out on a road, that's pitch black at night, because there's no street lamps. And you'd go out, and she's like, oh, my mom's in the house, but I have this tent set up outside. Do you want to go to the tent? I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. So we were undressing. I reached out. This is turning into. I reached between her legs, and then I was like getting on top of her. She's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Like a kind of a coy, funny voice, to be cute. And I'm like, I froze, and I'm like, "Am I doing it wrong?
Oh no!
What am I doing? What am I doing?" And then she laughed or something. I think she knew it was my first time.
Oh, you didn't tell her?
I think she did know. I think she did.
Okay.
uh,
Sexual experiences are awkward. They just are. I mean, not anymore.
No, now it's just like, that was boring. I'm done now. Time to go to bed.
Well, it's definitely different, right? When you get older.
Yeah.
Want to do one more question?
Yeah.
And call it?
You pick it. I think you picked the last one.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Flip it open.
I'm going to just skim. I'm just going to flip to a random point. Oh, interesting. Okay. If you had the power to go any distance into the future and return a year later with whatever knowledge you could obtain during your visit, would you? What would be the most valuable things to find out? What might they be worth to you? So how far into the future would you want to come? Would you want to go and spend a year?
How far? I think it should be singular. Pick one date, and what one thing would you want to bring back? Not things. Thing.
Oh, thing? Like an individual thing to bring back?
Or no.
How would you know?
Idea. Or thing you want to see or experience. and makes it tighter.
Okay. Do you have an answer?
No.
There are too many unknowns about the future. If I was given a time machine and said set a time to go to, I mean, there's a part of me that would love to say, I want to go 500 years into the future and see what crazy shit is going on. Right? And at the same time, though, if you think about it, you have, in a simplistic sense, two different options if you go that far into the future, right? The first option is that the human race doesn't exist anymore because there's been some kind of existential threat that's wiped out the entire planet, and it's a wasteland and it's uninhabitable, and it's just a waste of time, right? You go there and you either instantly die because the entire planet's irradiated or some other terrible misfortune befalls you, or you just see nothing and come back, right? It's like pretty useless. The second option is that you enter into a world in which you are so inferior to every other conscious being there that you can't really interact with them, get a full sense of knowledge of what's going on, and you have no guarantee that they will treat you as a respectable human being. So you don't know what the fuck's going to happen to you. Because you're going to basically be a chimp compared to every other conscious being that exists, whether that's because of artificial intelligence or because of humans upgrading their own intelligence, or any other myriad of intellectual explosions that could happen, right? And so 500 years into the future seems too far away for me, right? And then you can think about like 20 years into the future where it's like, well, I'm going to see that eventually in my lifetime anyway, so why would I do that? And so I think there's a middle ground there that makes sense, which would be somewhere around the 200 years into the future kind of domain, right? And the most interesting thing to try to get a handle on, and this is a really broad concept, but what is the state of human consciousness at that time? Like, how do human beings interfacing with technology view themselves in relation to the world? When I talk about myself, there's a fundamental biological constraint to the idea of meanness, right? My assumption is that 200 years from now, based on our technological growth and development, whether that's through things like genetic engineering or human brain interfaces, anything like that, is that the conceptualization of what the self is going to be radically different in some kind of fundamentally novel way. And so it'd be really interesting to see what that really means, right? Whether it's something really dumb like the idea of being able to expand sensory inputs to see different colors or to compute information faster or anything like that, to something more radically fundamental to the idea of kind of like parallelizing consciousness. So like there are interesting ways it could go, but just kind of this, what is the experience of being human in an era where technology is going to be so heavily intertwined with the self?
My answer is 100% different.
Okay. What is your answer?
There's a quote from some historian, philosopher, I don't know who. Something about you judge societies not on the success of their best, but on how they treat their weakest. And because I like dares, because I like pushing the boundaries, I would go 200 years in the future. I'd say the same as Steve. And I would hope that we are treating people better who are at the lowest end of society, defending how society is defined in 200 years, which wouldn't be too radical from now, I wouldn't think. But I am very ready to be very disappointed. I don't think we're going in a very good trajectory. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump. It's really nothing really to do with the current political state. It has to do with just kind of the national psyche, the global psyche doesn't seem to be going in a direction, at least now, that would support a demonstrably improved state of being for those among us, of which there are billions, who don't have what we have. And I would feel, if it were better, I would feel that would be amazing. That would be so rewarding. That would be so amazing. If it were worse, so I think it would be worth it for that chance. If it were worse, especially in this country, I think I would feel almost personally responsible. I would feel very, obviously, it would be just absolutely crushing. It would be devastating to know that despite what we thought were best efforts, what we thought were going in the right way, we ended up going backwards. And I just had this fear that we're throwing everything against the wall. We're trying so hard but we're not making a whole lot of progress. We're in some cases we're going backwards. And if we're going backwards trying so hard, are we going to try so hard for 200 years? I don't think so. The resources aren't there to try that hard. The will isn't there to try that hard for that long. So yeah, it's a little pessimistic, but I think if we are to make a real change, I really think what I hope I would see in 200 years is a real pairing of politics, of government, because those are separate. Politics and government are very separate. Of industry and of philanthropy, and that they'd be moving together in a cohesive direction. And I don't know if that would mean some sort of truce or some sort of like global government. I don't think that would work. But
no.
Some way for those four areas to work together, because you need each of them to push the needle forward. And right now it's completely out of whack, and it has been for many years.
You know what I find really interesting is how my conceptualization of the possible dimensions of what a future reality would be are so radically different from yours that we're talking about going to a future that is working with fundamentally different assumptions, right? Not once in your factoring of what a 200-year jump into the future would look like was there the idea of how technological growth would influence kind of day-to-day experience with human beings. And not once was there the understanding on my side of how policy dynamics would influence inequality in terms of dimensions within society. And so it's really interesting how we're talking along these completely different dimensions when we think about what is the future, where my thought about future is focused almost solely on this idea of as technology progresses, how will that impact society and opportunity? And yours is much more along the idea of as societal complexities increase, how do political dynamics and governmental policy influence the way that human beings can engage with each other in the world? And so I just found that really, really funny to see how differently we're thinking about what is the future 200 years from now. But anyway, it's great that we have such different opinions on a lot of these things. We did not get through many questions in the book of questions, but we only have one book of questions and unlimited episodes, so we'll get back to it after our next book club.
Yes. Oh, I can't do it next week, and I'm at a conference.
Are you? Oh, okay. All right. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. All right. See ya.